Hello minders, welcome back to the Mind of Watercolor. We're going to talk about brushes today, and I decided to do this episode because it's been a long time since I've talked just about brushes, and I really only made 2 videos, and both of those episodes are like over 2 years old. So I thought it was high time to show you what I'm still using, what new things I'm using, what things I've discovered about brushes, and none of this is gospel. So you are really talking about preference here, and brushes get into a lot of preference. So keep that foremost in your mind as you think about brushes. I mean, there are some constants and some givens and some things, but a lot of what you choose for a brush comes down to personal painting characteristics and preferences. So let me just say that right out front. And Reese, say hello to everyone so they won't think you've vanished. There's Reese. He's watching on as usual. So anyway, brushes. Kind of obsessed with them. I love good brushes. I love trying new brushes. There are just too many out there to try them all. So really the only way to approach this episode is just to show you what I'm using and to tell you why. You could paint well. You could do your best work with any of the brushes I will show you here today, and probably even with a lot cheaper ones. So first, let me start out with my favorite, my absolute favorite, and that has not changed, and that is Silver Brush Black Velvet. And I have more of these than literally any other brush because they are my favorite. I've got some of their newer large size, which they just added this larger range this last year. But I absolutely love this brush. Let me just talk about the characteristics. First of all, it's made of a blend of squirrel hair and synthetic hair. Now, squirrel hair is traditionally used for mops. It holds a lot of water. It holds more water even than a Kolinski sable. And it dispenses water very evenly. So it's prized for mops or quills. A lot of people know mops by the name quill. But squirrel hair is very fine and very limp. So to give these a little more usability, they've blended it with synthetic. And I think it's a really perfect blend. I have, however, found that they are still very soft. Even with the synthetic blend, they still tend to be a little soft. So where that kind of shows up is the bigger you get, the more they tend to be a little bit limp when they get very wet. It's not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of it depends on how you paint. If you're a dry, sort of heavy-handed painter, you like to do a lot of lifting and pushing around the paint, you may not want a brush like this. And I have recommended this brush. A lot of people have gone out there and bought this brush based on my recommendations. I've had just rave comments, just that they love it. But I have had a few people come back and say they hated them, mainly because they are a little limp. Just to give you an example of where I think that impacts negatively, these are fat riggers. This is a number 6 and a number 8 rigger, and I don't use these much. Number one, I don't use heavy riggers much. The fatter riggers are essentially just a long pointed round. In fact, Winsor Newton has one called a pointed round that is very much like these. They're just longer than your normal round. I feel that for this kind of a brush, these are a little bit limp. Now, however, thin riggers like this I do use. I mean, it snaps back enough. It is still very soft and limper than most. These larger rounds are pretty much like quills. I mean, these could act as a quill for me. A quill is, what I'm referring to as a quill, is also known as a mop. You can see, very fat, goes down to a thin point, and I love their flats. They're just, again, very soft. If you need to put in a soft wash with a flat, very wide flat edge, these are great. Silver Black Velvets are not cheap, but again, they are my go-to brush, and I find myself picking one of these up more often than just about any other brush. So they are still my favorite. Anyway, that's the Black Velvet line. All right, so the next brush I want to look at is the Princeton Neptune. And they are another favorite, or they have been a favorite. I don't reach for them as often as I used to, not because my opinion has diminished in them the least bit. It's just that I find more reason to use my black velvets, and I've been trying to use some and test some other synthetics that are new on the market, and we'll get to those in a minute. But I really still highly prize the Princeton Neptunes. It is a fully synthetic brush, and what they have tried to do is imitate squirrel with a synthetic. So it's a fine and soft, fits in that soft category again. I highly recommend them. If you don't like a soft brush, though, you may not want them. And I'll tell you, the brushes that I continually reach for are this rigger. I really, really like my Neptune rigger. Very flexible, and not too stiff. And there are times when you want that. There are also times when you want a stiffer one. I'll show you some of those in a minute. My least favorite of the Princeton Neptunes are probably their rounds. I really don't have any problem with the way they perform. They're just fine. It's just that I don't think their points are as good or as sharp when I need a sharp point. If I don't need a sharp point, and there are many times when you don't, a sharp point can actually be a drawback in some cases, then they're fine. And again, I would not hesitate to recommend a Princeton Neptune round, but I just don't find myself reaching for them as often. I like their oval wash. This is a really nice brush. And for quills, I find myself reaching for this Princeton Neptune number 4 rigger a lot in this size. I'm finding for quills in general, I don't tend to use the bigger sizes, although I really like this one. These just hold and move so much water that you have to kind of be working big to use them, and I'm not working big very often. I need to do that more, so I have them if I need them, but probably more often I reach for this number 4 quill. It's just, I think of it almost as a better round, because it's about like a number 12, maybe a number 16, 14 round, but comes to extremely sharp point. And I would probably reach for this over a large Princeton round, even if I had it. And I have another Princeton round, I can't seem to find it. I like their, what they call aquarelle brushes, I guess, with the slanted handles, which I never really use much, but I have a video on that. You know, it's for scratching and scraping. I just don't do a lot of scratching and scraping. But I do like their flats. I use this little one a lot. I also have a silver brush, black velvet, about that size. But this one is a little stiffer than the silver brush and a little longer. So, you know, this will hold a little more paint and it will give you a little more push and stiffness. So again, in the soft category, and one of my all-time favorites still are the Princeton Neptunes. And as you have questions about any of these lines of brushes, we're dealing mostly with brands, and I'm only dealing with synthetics today. Go ahead and ask those questions. I'll see if I can answer them. But the question that I get a lot, though, that really is kind of difficult to answer is, if you could only buy one brush, what brush should I buy? Well, you know, I can give you recommendations, but so much depends on what you paint. Always start with rounds. I think I've mentioned this in another video. If you're just starting out and you're just buying your first brushes, always start with a round. If you can afford 3 sizes, get 3 sizes. You know, a small, medium, and a large. Usually when you're beginning, you don't paint real big. You know, you might want this size, maybe a size slightly smaller than this, and maybe a size larger. As you gain experience, you know, you can get bigger rounds. You can start adding a flat. Flats are great if you do a lot of landscape. I'm hesitant really to recommend a best brush for anybody to start out with. I can just tell you my favorites, and I can tell you why I have what I have and what I use. But I have been using silver black velvets the longest, and then these were sort of came along second, and I really liked them, and I've not found anything that really supersedes them except for some very specific characteristics, and we're going to get to that next. All right, so now we come to some stiffer synthetics. And for the most part, synthetic brushes are pretty stiff, with the exceptions that I've already showed you, the Black Velvets and the Neptunes. One test that I use a lot to know how stiff is just to flick the tip against your finger. You can do it with different sizes. Your fingertip is very sensitive. You can feel very distinctly if you try it. So these are the Vinci Cosmotop spin brushes, and I really like these brushes. They are, I think, sort of a golden Taklon material. A golden Taklon is a pretty common filament for synthetic brushes, has been for years, but they continue to improve it. And one of the things that good brushes do is they manage to imitate the tapering that a natural hair fiber has. A natural hair fiber like Kolinski sable tapers down to a point, and that has always been a problem for synthetics or cheap synthetics. They're doing better at that, so they're able to imitate, that sort of taper and point. The only drawback I have is, just like with the Princeton Neptune, their rounds don't point very well. Again, that's not necessarily a drawback, because there are times you don't want points. Sometimes points get in the way. Let me show you, for instance, this is one of my best Kolinski sables. This is a rosemary. It comes down to literally a needle point. I want that point on this brush. I want to keep that point, but there are times I don't want to paint with that point, if you know what I mean. A stiffer brush is great for pushing paint around. It's great for mild lifting and mild scrubbing. It's great to reach for something like this, but they just paint really well too, especially if you're painting dry. If you're doing dry brush or you're doing simple flat washes that are not extremely wet. I really like their cat's tongues, these two oval washes. They actually point really well, especially this one. So that's very versatile. You can go from a nice little pointed area to a wide wash very easily. But Vinci just makes a high quality brush, so it's a good choice for a standard synthetic, but a high quality synthetic. And just sort of as an ergonomic thing, I like these sort of flat facets for holding their brushes. One of the few brushes that has that. Oh, and I like their rigger. It's one of my favorite riggers. When I need to go from a softer rigger, like the Black Velvet of the Neptune, to something a little stiffer, and again, there are times when you want something crisp and stiff, that is one of my favorites. From here on out, we're going to get into some brushes that I'm trying, that I can't offer a lot of opinion on yet, but I am getting promising results from. First is the Princeton Elite. Now, next to the Neptune, this is considered one of their best watercolor brushes. It is specifically designed for watercolor. These are a Kolinski sable Mimik. There are even brushes that are called a Mimik, and I'll show you a couple of those in a minute. But so far, these come the closest in terms of the snap, the feel of the snap. When I feel the stiffness on the end, they are a little stiffer than, this is an Escoda Reserva Kolinski sable, and it's got a pretty stiff snap. These are a little stiffer, I think. So there is that. But I'm really impressed with the points that they're able to hold on these and the water. And again, they're trying to imitate the thinning or the tapering fibers that a natural Kolinski hair has. And they do that by mixing hairs and by some manufacturing process. It's probably kind of secret. I'm still trying these. I've not had any negative results so far. I've only tried these rounds, from the little ones up to the big ones. And I really like this flat here. Again, if you need a nice crisp snap to your brush, you might want to consider the Princeton Elite. I'm finding them to be high quality brushes. And as I use these more, I'll have more to say about them, and I may even try some other varieties. Alright, here's something else that is brand new that I'm trying, and I have very little feedback on this yet. But in just a little bit of testing that I have done, I've been very, very encouraged. Again, this is another one I would categorize as a synthetic Kolinski Mimik. These are silver brush golden naturals, and these are a blend. They've used a blend of natural hair, not sable, but some other natural hair, and synthetic. And these are nice, longer, round points, and they have pretty good stiffness. I would call it, again, a medium sort of stiffness, very similar to the Princeton Elite. But I've just been really impressed with the moisture holding capability and dispensing and the points. Been very, very impressed with the tapers and the points. So silver brush, golden naturals, I think are going to be a great brush, and I'm anxious to maybe buy some different sizes than these and try those as well. But so far, all I have are these rounds. A word on sizes. You say, what size is that? And I always hesitate because sizes are really specific to brands. For instance, these sizes do not relate to just about any other brush I have, unfortunately. This is a 10, a 12, a 14, and a 16. So you kind of have to go visually with these. But from all indications and the little bit I've used them, really great brushes. Now here I think is a brush that deserves a place in most watercolor painters' arsenal. These are Grumbacher Golden Edge, and really they're just golden Taklon brushes, but they are really nicely crafted golden Taklon brushes. And I have yet to find a standard golden Taklon brush that gets as needle fine a point as these do. The reason I like them, these are probably the stiffest yet until you get into like a bristle brush. Very crisp, very stiff brush. So if you need something very stiff action, or you want some very light lifting capabilities, these golden edges do a great job. And I've used them many times for that purpose. And the same goes for the rigger. I use this rigger a lot. Again, when you flick it on the end of your finger, you can tell a difference in the stiffness. And sometimes you just need that action. Grumbacher Golden Edge. And I picked these up on a trip to Arizona just because I needed something that I didn't have to paint with. These are Creative Mark Mimiks, Kolinski Mimiks, and they fit in that same category of a synthetic, trying to mimic a Kolinski sable. And I just offer this as an alternative. I have painted with these on a few occasions, and I like them a lot. They are very fine brush, and if you can get a good deal on them, this is a Jerry's Artorama brand, I would not hesitate to pick some of these up. These two rounds are all I have, but I think they deserve mention. Don't be afraid of them. I think the Creative Mark brushes are really good. All right, and last but not least, let's take a look at the quills that I use. Quills are kind of an interesting animal. Quills are a brush I do not recommend for beginners. A quill, which is also known as a mop traditionally, is just designed to handle a lot of water. For someone who paints loosely and very wetly, they're a pretty good brush for that. I use them a lot for backgrounds. I like to sketch. If I'm sketching in watercolor, I like to sketch with them, like with the small ones. What I've found for my own purposes is that I reach for these three the most, this size roughly. I don't paint big real often, but if I did, I'd probably reach for these. This here is the Creative Mark Danube from Jerry's Artorama. Those have been pretty good. That's a blend, I think, of synthetic and natural. This is a Princeton Neptune quill. I reach for that a lot. I like quills that have a longer sort of body. This right here is a Creative Mark Squirrel. This is not the Danube, but the Harmony Squirrel. This is the pure squirrel. Traditionally, this is what was thought of as a mop. They are very limp, very soft, even though they will come to a very sharp point if you get a good one. One of the reasons I like this one. So you can go from doing some little fiddly detail to big washes, especially if you're putting down like one color or painting from one pool of paint. These are helpful. They just seem to dispense water forever. These two, I like to sketch with these. This is a Da Vinci, and this is a pure squirrel. And then this is part of this Danube Creative Mark Danube series, this longer one. Again, I like these longer body quill brushes. The reason I say I don't recommend quills for beginners is because if you're having trouble with water control, as a lot of beginners do, this is just going to make it more frustrating because they soak up so much water and put so much water down on the paper. It makes it frustrating to deal with all that water if you don't know why you're putting that much water in your brush. And also if you're painting smaller areas and making a lot of color changes, if you're going to different colors, painting a lot of little varied color areas, you're not going to want to use a quill because they hold so much water. You're washing out more, it's holding more color. So they're more useful when you're painting monochromatically or painting from one continuous pool of paint, not only just augmenting that pool of paint with other colors without washing out your brush, basically. So these three are Creative Mark from Jerry's Artorama, the Danube series, and I like those a lot. This one also from Creative Mark, Jerry's Artorama brand, Pure Squirrel, like that. I like this little one for sketching. This is one I haven't tried, just it's brand new. It's still got the brush hardener it came shipped in. This is a Da Vinci Casaneo. It's a 100% synthetic, a new series from Da Vinci, or new to me. So I'm anxious to try that out. I like these sizes. Again, these smaller sizes I like for doing sketching with a light color. The Princeton Neptunes, again, I can highly recommend. I think they're great. Most commonly I'm reaching for this size. They're soft as it is, and so they make for a really good quill or mop. This is kind of a unique set. Silver Atelier quills from Silverbrush. And in a lot of respects, they don't really even seem like a traditional quill. This one does. This is actually squirrel. So I'd call that probably a standard mop or quill. But why they put these two, which are really just rounds. This is a golden Taklon quill, which I guess if you want to paint something that looks like a quill, that's basically what it is. And I guess if you're wanting a fat round that comes to a tip and it kind of looks like a quill. So not really sure, except that it probably holds more water than a standard round. This is a blending quill, which I also thought unusual, and I have used this a little. It works well. Hog's bristle, which I assume this is pretty absorbent. It holds a lot of water. So the Silverbrush quill set, and you can buy this in a set along with some hakes. Now this is new. You've heard me talk about the Da Vinci Cosmotop Spin. This is a Da Vinci Cosmotop Spin quill. I haven't used it yet. I've only just bought this. Since I like Cosmotop Spin really well, I thought this might be a nice brush because it is longer, even though it's a Taklon type material. It will hold a lot of water. As I try that, I'll probably comment on that later. But that's quills. And if you have questions about quills or mops, put them down in the comments. We'll try to answer them for you. Thanks so much, everyone, for watching. This will be my last video before the Thanksgiving holidays here in the States. So everybody have a great Thanksgiving holiday. And I may be a little lag in time after Thanksgiving getting the next video up because I'm taking some time off. But there will be more coming. So we'll see everybody in the next video. Bye-bye.